Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby, and if you like true crime videos, then stick around, see if you like this video, and if you like this video, then hit that subscribe button down below. So I recently started a new series on my channel called Crime and Composition, and it's basically where I go over a case, I cover the entire story, I show pictures, all of that, while also drawing the main victim in the case. Like I said in my first Crime and Composition video, I feel like drawing somebody is a very respectful way to pay homage, and I really enjoy drawing. I'm trying to get back into it again, and of course, YouTube and sharing these stories is one of my favorite things in the world, so it just goes hand in hand. I told you guys in my Brian Shappert video that the next case that I was going to be covering was another cold case that was recently solved in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and that is the case of Michelle Martinko. So with all that being said, let's get right into the case. Michelle Marie Martinko was born on October 6, 1961 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to parents Janet and Albert F. Martinko. She was the younger of two daughters. Her older sister's name is Janelle. When it came to school, Michelle attended Cedar Rapids Kennedy High School, and Michelle was described by her sister as being a normal teenage girl who worried about tests in school and, of course, boys. Michelle did go through a very rough patch in her early life when she was diagnosed with scoliosis, and she had to wear a brace that went from her hips to her neck. During this time, she became very shut off, quiet, and didn't talk to many other people in school. It got better though in time, and she was able to live a normal life without the brace. Michelle was known as an above average student who was also a very talented performer. During her sophomore year, she had joined the twirling squad at her school and was also a part of choir and theater. Michelle didn't have a ton of friends, and it was mostly speculated to be because she was quite beautiful. Michelle was said to be a very sweet girl, but we all know teenagers can be very harsh. It was hard for her to make female friends. In the year 1979, Michelle was a senior who was excited to be attending Iowa State University the next year for interior design, but she would never have the chance. On December 19th of that year, Michelle attended a banquet for her school's concert choir that was called the Kennedy Concert Choir. This banquet was held at the Sheraton Inn located in her hometown of Cedar Rapids. For this event, she dressed up as one does. She wore a black dress with black tights and heels. She was also wearing a waist-length jacket and had a brown leather purse at her side. This event took place on a Wednesday night. After the event was over, Michelle decided that she was going to take a trip to the mall to pick up a coat that her mother had put on layaway. This mall, the Westdale Mall, even though it had recently opened, was one Michelle was very familiar with, mostly because she worked there. Michelle asked her friend if she wanted to go with her for this little shopping trip, but her friend declined the offer, so Michelle, with $180 in her pocket, went by herself. She hopped in her family's tan and green 1972 Buick Electra and headed towards the Westdale Mall. We know she made it inside the mall because she did end up speaking to a few friends of hers that were also there shopping, but the last time she was seen was around 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. outside of a jewelry store. Hours and hours ticked by, and Michelle still had not made it home, and her parents grew increasingly worried for their daughter. Now yes, she was an adult, but this was very unlike her. Where would she have gone so late on a Wednesday night? Her family knew something had to have gone wrong, but they were hoping for the best. At around 2 a.m., her father decided to phone the police and report her missing. He and the police set out to find the 18-year-old. About 2 hours later, around 4 a.m., Michelle was found. The police located the family's Buick in the mall's parking lot outside of the JCPenney store. Inside the car was Michelle's lifeless body slumped over the front passenger side of the vehicle. She had been stabbed 29 times in her neck, face, and also chest. There was barely any blood outside of the car, so it was determined she had most likely been killed inside of it. The murder weapon was sharp and it was pointed. It didn't seem like a knife though. They weren't exactly sure what the killer had used. There were 0 fingerprints found, so the killer most likely was wearing gloves. Based on the state of her hands, she definitely put up a fight. The characteristics of her murder were interesting, to say the least, and police were able to tell a lot from those aspects. Firstly, she was found fully clothed. so it didn't seem like the murder was sexually driven. Secondly, money was still in her purse, so it didn't seem like a robbery gone wrong. Thirdly, considering the number and placement of the stab wounds, it seemed that of a personal nature. They thought the killer was someone who knew the victim personally. They couldn't determine the sex of the killer at the time, but they were leaning more towards a male. So it wasn't sexually or money-driven. What exactly was the reasoning the killer had for killing this young girl? Jealousy? The simple desire to take an innocent person's life? Those were questions that the police and Michelle's loved ones wanted answers to. Her murder took place a week before Christmas, casting a very dark shadow on the area of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. During the initial investigation, police had very little to go off of, but decided to turn to the general public. They asked anyone with any information to call in. In that first week after her murder, more than 200 people responded to the police's plea for help in the case. Police followed any lead that seemed even somewhat promising and interviewed dozens of people, even clearing some using a polygraph test. One of the people questioned was a young man said to have been following women around in the mall and strangely touching mannequins in the stores. Although inappropriate and very strange, it didn't seem like he had anything to do with Michelle's case. Another person initially perceived to have something to do with her murder was a man who had broken into a home in the area and sexually assaulted a woman at knife point. He denied the accusation he was involved with Michelle's case, and this was proven to be true much later on when DNA evidence was finally tested. This was an absolutely beautiful teenager who was brutally murdered outside a location many teenagers go. Of course, this was a breeding ground for rumors. Some said that Michelle was possibly receiving harassing phone calls in the days leading up to her death, but police could never prove this to be true or false. There was also a rumor that Michelle was actually killed days after they originally located her body. Police, though, also said this was false. When it came to her family and who they thought originally may have been responsible, they looked at Michelle's ex-boyfriends, thinking it may be one of them. All ex-boyfriends, though, would later be tested through DNA and cleared of any suspicion. About 5 months after the murder, huge controversy arose. A woman came forward with information. She claimed that during the very early hours on December 20th, 1979, she went to the mall parking lot to locate her daughter, who had gotten off of work at the mall and was having car troubles. She said that as she was driving around the parking lot, that she did see Michelle's vehicle and another one parked next to it, that Michelle's door was open and a man was standing in front of the open door outside of the car. The woman who claimed to have witnessed this passed along the information to the daughter of the public safety commissioner, thinking that the information would be passed along to authorities. It never was. The woman phoned the police months later to see if they ever looked into what she saw, and police said they were never told that information. They even considered charging the commissioner with failure to pass along the information to them, but charges were never filed. In that same year of 1980, police were still working endlessly to track down Michelle's killer, going as far as having a composite sketch done of the man believed to have taken her life by putting 2 supposed witnesses under hypnosis. The witnesses described a man in his teens or early 20s who was about 6 feet tall and weighed about 165 to 175 pounds. They described him as having brown eyes and curly brown hair. This composite sketch was released in the local newspaper on June 19, 1980, exactly 6 months after the murder. These 2 individuals weren't the only people interviewed under hypnosis. All in all, around 30 people were. Police even brought in psychics early on, something usually not thought of until a case runs cold, which it did. 2 years after the murder, Michelle's father decided to file a $250,000 lawsuit against the owners of the Westdale Mall. He claimed they didn't provide reasonable security at the mall, and that maybe if they did, his daughter would still be alive. The Iowa Supreme Court appealed the case in favor of the mall owners. After this event, it would be 25 years before any other prominent events happened in this case. In the year 2006, 27 years after Michelle's life was tragically taken from her, the Cedar Rapids Police Department received a tip. This little tip went nowhere though, but while an officer was reviewing case files, he found what he thought was the killer's blood on one of Michelle's pieces of clothing. All these years later, and finally, someone came across something in the evidence thought to be able to make a connection to who actually did this. With this little bit of blood, they were able to create a DNA profile of the person, and it was determined that fewer than 1 in 100 billion people would match that exact DNA. There's not even close to that many people on the earth right now. So if they found a match, it was their match. They entered the DNA into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, and unfortunately, at the time, there was no match found. They decided to test the DNA against many of the original suspects, still no matches. Out of more than 80 potential suspects in the case, more than 60 were completely cleared at this time. Now, another 11 years later, in the year 2017, using that same DNA, a company called Snapshot that specialized in DNA phenotyping was hired to create a composite sketch of the suspect using that DNA. The thing though is that after the sketch was done, people were very surprised because it looked so different from the original sketch done by the two witnesses put under hypnosis. This sketch showed a man with blonde hair and blue eyes. The company, though, also did an age progression of the photo to show what the man may look like in today's time. A press conference was held and the photos were released to the public in the hopes that maybe this time something would come of it. When the photos were first released, a former classmate of Michelle's came forward saying that the sketches look a lot like another former classmate of theirs. This classmate being brought up, though, had been cleared through DNA testing years prior. But more than 100 new leads came in because of these images. That next year, 2018, the DNA was entered into GEDMatch, a public genealogy website I have discussed many times before on my channel. This website is pretty much most known as being the one used to help find out who the Golden State Killer was. Now, GEDMatch came back with a result. They found one match. This match was determined to be the killer's second cousin once removed, a female. Using genealogy, they were able to start a family tree and started with this female's 4 sets of great-great-grandparents, claiming that the killer was a descendant of one of those sets of people. They were able to obtain DNA from 2 of the branches of the family tree, eliminating those 2 and now focusing on the other 2. An investigator for the Cedar Rapids Police Department contacted a family member of the 3rd branch in the family tree, and after a DNA test was done, it was determined this individual was first cousins with Michelle's killer. This ultimately narrowed down their suspect list to a group of 3 brothers who grew up in Manchester, Iowa. All 3 brothers were brought in and put under surveillance. Now it was time to get their DNA and determine which one killed Michelle Marie Martinko. 2 of the brothers were eliminated through DNA testing. The 3rd brother was Jerry Lynn Burns. He didn't give up his DNA voluntarily. During questioning, though, he drank a few cans of soda using a straw. After he was released, police collected DNA from the straw he used and compared it to the DNA found on Michelle's clothing. It was a match. Police made a trip to Burns's business in Manchester, Iowa. They asked him for a sample of his DNA, and he refused, but was eventually made to do so with a search warrant. Even though they already tested DNA sneakily the first time, they needed a legitimate swab from the suspect. During questioning, he was said to be very stoic. He didn't show much emotion at all. He claimed he did not know Michelle. When he was asked if he killed anyone on December 19th, 1979, he kept saying, "Test the DNA." Well, when the DNA sample was tested, it came back a positive match again. Even when Burns was told he was being arrested for the murder of Michelle Martinko, he still remained stone cold. Ironically, though, he was arrested on December 19th, 2018, exactly 39 years to the date that he took Michelle's life. His original trial was set to be on October 14th of the year 2019, but the defense requested more time to gather witnesses and evidence. The trial officially began on February 12th of this year. The trial was a roller coaster with so many ups and downs. The defense argued that DNA evidence in Michelle's case had been mishandled, saying that multiple items of clothing should not have been placed in the same bag together. Prosecutors decided to bring in a criminologist, and this criminologist said that when it comes to storing evidence, this is not out of the ordinary. Burns had absolutely no alibi for the night of Michelle's murder, but the defense argued that Burns had been to the mall before, and maybe his DNA transferred to Michelle that way, that maybe she brushed up against something in the mall that he had previously touched. Obviously, this didn't stand up much in court. Videos of police interviews with Burns were showed during the trial by the prosecutors, where Burns claimed he had no idea how his DNA got on her clothing, and where he questioned whether he could have mentally blocked out the murder, not actually remembering that he did it at all. So basically, in other words, Burns is sitting there insisting he didn't know Michelle or took her life, but also is conflicted because he thinks maybe he did take her life, but somehow blocked it out after it happened. Yeah. Which I have to say that this man sat there with barely any emotion, and even if you're emotionally shut off, if authorities came to you and said that they found your DNA at a crime scene from 1979, wouldn't you act somewhat surprised by that news? But hey, that's just me. On February 20th of 2020, this year, after only 3 hours of deliberation, 66-year-old Jerry Lynn Burns was found guilty of first-degree murder of Michelle Marie Martinko. He would have been 25 years old at the time that he murdered her. Burns' sentence has not fully been determined yet, but in Iowa, the state law mandates a full life sentence without the possibility of parole for anyone charged with first-degree murder. A man who served Burns almost every day at a BP gas station said, "The community is in shock. His friends are in shock. His family is in shock. I feel bad for the victim's family because they've been wondering every day of their life what happened to their daughter. I also feel bad for, his current family and friends because now they have to go through all this as well." After he was found guilty for Michelle's murder, a couple more suspicions arose. Firstly, his wife died of supposed suicide back in the year 2008. Some question if it actually was suicide or not. Secondly, his cousin vanished mysteriously on, can you guess the date? December 19th, 2013, exactly 34 years after Michelle was murdered. Makes you think. Even though these two events seem strange and very coincidental, a Delaware County sheriff claims they have no reason to suspect Burns in either of these cases. Michelle's sister and her husband were interviewed by ABC9 in Cedar Rapids, and they said that closure isn't necessarily what they feel. More than anything, it's justice. Janelle was 12 years older than Michelle, so there's a bit of an age gap. By the time Michelle was in middle school, Janelle was already out of the house. She said that the most heartwarming thing was hearing Michelle's friends take the stand and share their memories of her. Michelle and Janelle's parents passed away before the trial ever began. Their father back in 1995 and their mother in 1998. Although the sisters were a bit far apart in age, they were quite close. Jerry Lynn Burns had a scar, a very prominent scar, one that was assumed to be left by Michelle when she was fighting for her life on the night of December 19th, 1979. Michelle was a fighter. She tried her hardest to save her life. If she didn't try so hard, then the chances are that they would have never found any of his blood all those years later on her clothing. Janelle's husband said that, in other words, Michelle caught her own killer. And that is the case of Michelle Marie Martinko. There are a few things about this case in particular that really upset me, and I gotta say, one of the main things is that if your loved one was taken away from you in such a horribly tragic way, For all those years that you didn't know what happened, you would want to know exactly what happened that night. Besides, of course, wondering who it was who took their life and who was responsible for this, you're going to wonder exactly what happened right before their life was taken. You're going to think about the last things that your loved one heard before their life was taken. You know, you're going to think about whether they said something, what their last words were before their life ended. These are things you're going to think about. And when it comes to Jerry Lynn Burns, he isn't giving any information forward. He acts like he didn't do it, or maybe he did and he just doesn't remember. So these are questions that Michelle's loved ones are probably never going to know the answers to. It's like they know who did it, but they're never going to know those little tidbits of information that they've probably been thinking about for 40 years now. But of course, nonetheless, this case was solved, and that is the main thing that matters. But also, one of the main reasons that this case was solved was through GEDMatch. GEDMatch is a genealogy website that has been used to solve many cases before, and I've mentioned it before on my channel. I actually had never been on this specific link before. I will put it down below in the description of this video, and it lists all the cases that GEDMatch has helped solve, and it is mind-blowing. I did not realize how many cases GEDMatch had helped solve. I mean, the list just keeps going and going and going and going, and I know that they're mostly used through the DNA Doe Project, so pretty much most of the John and Jane Does that have been identified recently have been identified using GEDMatch, which is amazing. I mean, they're doing incredible work. The aspect of this case that I was really blown away by was the fact that they found one match and were able to create an entire family tree and then narrow it down from there and ultimately find the killer. They found the killer, that is done, but I really hope that eventually her family can have more answers. The main thing that I'm thinking is the motive, because that is completely unknown. Michelle, from what I read, was a beautiful soul, and there's no reason to take anybody's life in general, but there's just so much about this case that is unknown. And I hope eventually through hypnosis or something he can give more information. So this is my final drawing of Michelle Martinko. This was actually the third drawing that I did of her. The other two, I felt like I could have gotten her features a lot better, so I decided to try again. And this is the one that I feel like I did the best on and that I want to share on YouTube for you guys. So let me know down below in the comments what you think. And of course, let me know how you guys are liking this series so far, and if there's anybody else whose case you want me to cover and also draw on my channel in the series, let me know that also down below in the comments. With all that being said, I hope that everybody is staying safe. I'm sending love, a big fucking group hug to all of you guys. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in my next video.